High Counselor Varric stood at the great window of the council chamber and looked out at the dying world below. Sanctuary Prime had once been beautiful. Green forests had covered the mountains. Blue oceans had stretched from horizon to horizon. Children had played in the streets of great cities without fear. Now the crystal was everywhere. The hollowing had started 7 years ago. A mining crew had found strange crystals deep beneath the northern continent. Within days, the miners had stopped responding to messages. When a rescue team arrived, they found the entire camp frozen in place. The miners had turned to crystal. Their bodies were still standing, still holding their tools, but they were no longer alive. They were statues made of pale blue glass. The infection spread faster than anyone could have imagined. It moved through soil and water and air. It touched living things and changed them. Animals became crystal. People became crystal. Nothing could stop it. Varric was old now. He had led his people for 30 years, and he had never faced anything like this. The Valori were a peaceful species. They had no great weapons. They had no mighty fleets. Long ago, they had traveled the stars freely, exploring and learning and helping where they could. But those days were gone. Their ships were old. Their technology was outdated. They had spent centuries focusing on art and philosophy, while other empires built armies. Now those empires refused to help. The Valori had nothing to offer, no strategic value, no military power, no resources worth fighting for. One by one, every plea for assistance had been rejected. Varric turned away from the window and faced the council. 12 Valori elders sat in a half-circle, their faces tired and afraid. They had been arguing for hours about what to do next. "There is one option we have not tried," said Ambassador Kira Saul. She was young for a diplomat, barely 40 years old, but she was also the smartest person in the room, and everyone knew it. A general distress call, broadcast into open space. Perhaps someone will hear. Elder Torvund, the keeper of the archives, shook his head slowly. We would be announcing our weakness to the entire galaxy. Raiders, slavers, conquerors, they would come to pick over our bones. Our bones will be crystal soon enough, Kira replied. What do we have left to lose? The council fell silent. Varric looked at each of them in turn. He saw the same thing in every face. Despair, acceptance, the quiet surrender of people who had run out of hope. Send the message, he said finally. Let the universe know that the Valori are dying. Perhaps someone out there still remembers kindness. The transmission went out that night. It traveled at the speed of light, spreading outward from Sanctuary Prime in an expanding sphere. Most of it would vanish into empty space. Most of it would never reach another living soul. But some of it did. 3 days later, a response arrived. The communication officer nearly fell out of her chair when she saw it. The message was brief and came from a ship that was already approaching Valori space. It identified itself as the Starward Horizon, representing something called the United Earth Coalition. Its captain requested permission to approach and offer assistance. Kira Sol brought the news to the council personally. She was trembling as she spoke. Earth, Elder Torvund whispered. He rose from his seat and moved to the ancient archive terminal in the corner of the chamber. His fingers flew across the controls, searching through records that were centuries old. I know that name. I have seen it somewhere. The others watched as he worked. Finally, he found what he was looking for. A file from 312 years ago. He projected it onto the main screen, so everyone could see. The images showed a small blue planet, covered in ice and ash. Massive clouds of dust blocked out the sun. Oceans were frozen solid. Forests had burned and died. The planet was in the grip of a catastrophic winter caused by an asteroid impact. According to the Valori scientists who had studied it, the dominant species had perhaps 10 years before total extinction. But the Valori had helped. A ship called the Gentle Dawn had traveled to the dying world and used terraforming technology to stabilize its atmosphere. They had cleaned the dust from the sky and warmed the frozen seas. They had given the primitive species a second chance at life. The species was called humanity. The planet was called Earth. "We saved them," Torvald said quietly. 300 years ago, we saved them from extinction. Varric stared at the screen. He remembered the old stories now. The mission to the frozen world. The decision to help a species that could never repay the favor. It had been considered a noble act, a gesture of pure compassion. Then it had been forgotten, filed away in the archives, just another footnote in Valori history. "They could not have had space travel," one of the council members said. "They were barely using metal tools. How could they possibly have found us?" "Does it matter?" Kira asked. "They found us. They are coming, and they are offering help." The starward horizon arrived the next morning. When Varric saw it on the view screen, his breath caught in his throat. The ship was enormous. It dwarfed anything the Valori had ever built. Its hull was thick and armored, covered in weapon emplacements and sensor arrays. It looked like a predator, a creature built for war, and yet its crew spoke peacefully. Its captain, a human named Daniel Hayes, asked permission before entering orbit. He apologized for any alarm his ship's appearance might cause. He explained that humanity had learned hard lessons about survival, and they built their vessels to handle any threat. "We received your distress call," Captain Hayes said. His face appeared on the view screen, a strange alien visage with soft skin and small eyes. "We came as fast as we could. How can we help?" Varric could not speak. He had expected rejection. He had expected silence. He had expected to watch his people die alone. He had not expected this. Kira Sol stepped forward and faced the human captain. "We are dying," she said simply. "A parasite is consuming our world. We have no cure. We have no defense. We have nothing left but hope." Captain Hayes nodded slowly. His expression was serious, but not unkind. "Then we will give you more than hope," he said. "We will give you everything we have. Tell us what you need, and we will make it happen." "Why?" Varric finally managed to ask. "We are strangers to you. We have nothing to offer. Why would you help us?" The human smiled. It was a strange expression, showing teeth in a way that should have seemed threatening, but somehow did not. "You helped us once," Hayes said. 300 years ago, when we were dying, someone reached down and pulled us back from the edge. We never forgot. We have been searching for you ever since." He paused. "Consider this a thank you." Varric felt something he had not felt in years. It took him a moment to recognize it. Hope. Ambassador Kira Sol had never been inside an alien vessel before. As the shuttle carried her up from the surface of Sanctuary Prime toward the massive human ship in orbit, she tried to calm her racing heart. The Valori were a cautious people. They did not rush into unknown situations. They studied. They considered. They waited. But there was no time for waiting anymore. The shuttle bay of the starward horizon was larger than some Valori cities. Dozens of smaller craft were parked in neat rows, attended by humans in matching uniforms. Everything was loud. Machinery hummed and clanked. People shouted to each other across the bay. Music played from somewhere she could not see. The humans seemed to exist in a constant state of noise and motion. Captain Daniel Hayes met her at the shuttle door. He was taller than she had expected, with broad shoulders and a firm handshake. His grip was strong, but not painful. She noticed that he was careful with her, adjusting his movements to avoid startling her. "Welcome aboard the Starward Horizon," he said. "I hope the journey was not too uncomfortable." "It was fine," Kira replied. "Your ship is very large." Hayes smiled. "She is the pride of the fleet. Took 12 years to build her. 2,000 crew members. Enough firepower to crack a moon. He paused and saw her expression. Do not worry. We only use it on things that deserve cracking. He led her through the corridors of the ship. Everywhere she looked, she saw humans. They moved with purpose and energy, always busy, always doing something. Some of them stopped to stare at her. She was probably the first Valori they had ever seen. But they were not hostile. Most of them nodded politely, or offered small waves of greeting. The bridge was at the heart of the ship. Dozens of officers sat at control stations, monitoring systems and communications. A large view screen showed the pale blue sphere of Sanctuary Prime floating in space. From up here, the crystal infections looked like white scars spreading across the continents. This is Lieutenant Commander Grace Sullivan, Hayes said, introducing a woman with short dark hair and intelligent eyes. She is our Chief Science Officer. She will be leading the research effort. Grace extended her hand, and Kira shook it carefully. Human customs were strange, but not unpleasant. I have been reviewing the data you transmitted, Grace said. This hollowing organism is unlike anything in our records. It feeds on bioelectric energy and converts organic matter into crystalline structures. Fascinating, in a horrible way. Fascinating is not the word I would use, Kira replied. No, I suppose not. I apologize. Grace's expression softened. We will find a way to stop it. That is what we do. Over the next several hours, Kira met the rest of the senior staff. Dr. Nathan Cross was the chief medical officer. A tall man with gentle hands and a calm voice. He asked detailed questions about Valori biology and took careful notes. Sergeant Maya Lopez led the Marine detachment, a compact woman with hard eyes and an easy smile. She spoke about security and defense in ways that made Kira uncomfortable. But she also spoke about protecting civilians with a passion that was impossible to fake. These humans were warriors, that much was obvious. But they were not conquerors. They did not speak of taking or claiming. They spoke of helping and protecting. It was strange. The Valori had met many species over the centuries, and most of them wanted something. These humans wanted only to give. That evening, a shuttle carrying Dr. Cross and a scientific team landed on the surface of Sanctuary Prime. Kira accompanied them to the edge of one of the infected zones. The crystal stretched for kilometers in every direction, a forest of pale blue spires that had once been trees and animals and people. Dr. Cross knelt beside a crystallized flower and examined it closely. His instruments hummed and clicked as they gathered data. The conversion is total, he said quietly. Every cell has been replaced. The original organic structure is gone completely. He looked up at Kira. How long does the process take? Hours for small creatures, days for larger ones, weeks for a full-grown Valori. She paused. They remain conscious through most of it. They can feel themselves changing. They can feel themselves dying. Cross closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, there was something hard in his expression, something determined. We will stop this, he said. I do not care what it takes. Meanwhile, aboard the Starward Horizon, Captain Hayes received a visitor. Elder historian Torvin had traveled up from the surface, carrying a small data crystal. He was old and frail, and the journey had tired him. But he insisted on speaking with the captain personally. I found the complete records, Torvin said. Everything about the mission to your world 300 years ago. He inserted the crystal into the ship's computer and projected the files onto the main screen. Images appeared, showing the frozen Earth, the Valori ship Gentle Dawn, the terraforming process that had saved humanity from extinction. Hayes watched in silence. His jaw was tight. His hands were clenched at his sides. We did not know, Torvin said softly. We never expected you to find us. We never expected you to remember. We helped because it was the right thing to do, not because we wanted anything in return. Hayes was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "We remember," he said. "Not the details, not every single fact, but we remember. We remember what you did, not the names or dates. But we remember that someone helped us when we had nothing. When we were dying in the cold and the dark, someone reached down and gave us a chance to live." He turned to face Torvin. "Every culture on Earth has stories about beings who came from the sky and saved us. We thought they were myths. We thought they were fairy tales. But we never stopped looking for them. We never stopped hoping we could find them and say thank you." He put a hand on Torvin's shoulder. The old Valori looked up at him with wide, wondering eyes. "We found you," Hayes said, "and we are not going to let you die. I do not care if we have to fight the entire galaxy. I do not care if we have to tear the stars themselves apart. We will save you. That is a promise." Torvin felt tears forming in his eyes. He had lived for 200 years and had never cried in front of a stranger before. But these humans were not strangers anymore, something he did not have a word for. Hayes turned back to the view screen and opened a communication channel to Earth. "This is Captain Daniel Hayes of the Starward Horizon," he said. "Priority message for United Earth Coalition Command. We have found the ones who saved us. They are dying. Send everything." The message traveled across the stars at faster than light speed. Within hours, it would reach Earth. Within days, the response would begin. Humanity was coming, and they were bringing everything they had. The message from Captain Hayes arrived on Earth in the middle of the night. Within 1 hour, every major government official was awake. Within 2 hours, the emergency session of the United Earth Coalition Assembly had begun. Governor Leonard Price stood at the podium and looked out at the assembled representatives. They had come from every nation, every continent, every colony in the solar system. Mars was represented, Luna was represented. The asteroid mining stations and the outer system research posts were all connected by live video feed. This was the largest gathering in human history. 300 years ago, Price began, our ancestors faced extinction. An asteroid struck the Earth and blocked out the sun. Billions died. Those who survived watched the world freeze around them. They had no hope. They had no future. They were simply waiting to die. He paused and let the words settle over the assembly. But they did not die. The skies cleared. The ice melted. Life returned to our world. For centuries, we did not know why. We had stories, of course. Every culture had tales of beings who came from above and saved humanity. We called them angels, gods, sky spirits. We built religions around them. We wrote songs and painted pictures and told our children that someone out there loved us enough to save us. Price pressed a button, and the view screen behind him lit up with images from the Valori archives. The frozen Earth, the ship called Gentle Dawn, the terraforming beams restoring the atmosphere. Now we know the truth. An alien species called the Valori found our dying world and chose to help us. They asked for nothing in return. They expected nothing in return. They saved 8 billion human beings simply because it was the right thing to do. The assembly was silent. Representatives stared at the images with wide eyes and open mouths. Today, the Valori are dying. A parasitic organism is consuming their homeworld. They have no cure, they have no defense. They sent a distress call into the void, hoping someone would hear. Price's voice grew stronger, and we heard. Captain Daniel Hayes of the Starward Horizon has made contact. He has requested assistance. He has asked us to send everything we have. Price stepped back from the podium and spread his arms wide. This is not a debate. This is not a discussion. This is a statement of who we are as a species. The Valori saved us when we could not save ourselves. Now it is our turn to save them. I call for an immediate vote on full military and humanitarian mobilization. The vote was unanimous. Every single representative raised their hand in favor. Some were crying, some were cheering. All of them understood that this was a moment that would be remembered forever. On Luna, Admiral Patricia Cole received her orders within the hour. She was a small woman with silver hair and eyes like steel. She had commanded the coalition fleet for 15 years and had never lost a battle. Now she faced a different kind of war. "I want every ship that can fly," she told her staff. Hospital ships, research vessels, cargo haulers, construction platforms. And warships. Plenty of warships. We do not know what else is out there, and I will not let our people fly into unknown space without protection. The mobilization began immediately. Shipyards that had been quiet for years roared back to life. Engineers worked double shifts to prepare vessels for deep space travel. Supplies were loaded by the ton. Medical equipment, food, water, construction materials, weapons, and ammunition, everything humanity could spare, was packed into cargo holds and made ready for launch. On Mars, Dr. Samuel Vance led the research effort. He was the director of the Olympus Mons Biological Containment Facility, the most secure laboratory in the solar system. His team had already received samples of the hollowing organism, transmitted from the starward horizon. Now they worked around the clock to understand it. "The crystal structure is organic in origin," Vance explained to his team. "It spreads by converting living cells into crystalline matrices. The conversion process is efficient and nearly impossible to reverse." "How do we stop it?" asked one of his researchers. Vance rubbed his tired eyes. "We find something that can break down the crystal without harming living tissue. A biological agent that targets the hollowing specifically." He looked at the images of crystallized Valori civilians. "We have to find it fast. Every hour we waste, more of them die." Meanwhile, on the red plains of Mars, Chief Engineer Rosa Delgado stood in front of a massive storage facility. Inside were dozens of terraforming platforms, machines designed to transform dead worlds into living ones. Humanity had used them to make Mars habitable. They had used them to build floating cities in the atmosphere of Venus. They were the most powerful environmental tools ever created. "Can they be modified?" asked her assistant. "They have to be," Rosa replied. "Once Dr. Vance develops the cure, we need a way to spread it across an entire planet. These platforms can disperse biological agents through the atmosphere, the soil, and the water. If we configure them correctly, we can treat the whole world at once." She looked up at the stars, knowing that somewhere out there, an alien species was counting on them. "Get the teams ready. We launch in 48 hours. Back on Earth, ordinary people watched the news and felt something stir in their hearts. The story of the Valori spread across every channel, every social media platform, every conversation. People who had never thought about aliens before suddenly cared deeply about saving them. Volunteers flooded recruitment centers. Donations poured in from every corner of the globe. School children wrote letters to the Valori, telling them to hold on. Help was coming. Humanity had always been divided. Nations argued. Cultures clashed. Wars had been fought over land, resources, and ideology. But now, for the first time in history, every human being was united by a single purpose. They were going to save the people who had saved them. 3 weeks after Captain Hayes sent his message, the fleet was ready. 47 vessels assembled in orbit around Earth. Hospital ships and research vessels, cargo haulers loaded with supplies, construction platforms carrying terraforming equipment. And at the center of the formation, a dozen warships, each one bristling with weapons. Admiral Cole stood on the bridge of the flagship, the coalition carrier, Resolute. She looked at the fleet through the main view screen and felt a surge of pride. "All ships report ready," her executive officer announced. Cole nodded slowly. "Open a channel to the fleet." Every crew member on every ship heard her voice. "This is Admiral Patricia Cole. In a few moments, we will make the jump to Valori space. We are going to save a species that once saved us. Some of us will not come home. Some of us will die far from Earth, fighting for people we have never met. But we will not fail. We cannot fail. Because this is who we are. This is what humanity does. When someone needs help, we answer the call." She paused and looked out at the stars. "All ships, engage hyperdrives. Let us go repay a debt." 47 flashes of light, and then they were gone, hurtling across the galaxy toward a world they had never seen. Ambassador Kira Sol was standing on the observation deck of the starward horizon when the fleet emerged from hyperspace. She had been told to expect help. She had been told that Earth was sending ships. She had not expected this. The vessels filled the sky. They blocked out the stars. They were more ships than the Valori had ever built in their entire history. Kira fell to her knees and wept. Help had arrived. The human fleet spread across the sky like a shield. Admiral Patricia Cole established her command center in orbit and immediately began coordinating with the Valori military. General Sarvak Noor had fought to protect his people for 7 long years. He had watched the Hollowing consume everything he loved. He had lost soldiers, friends, family. Now he stood on the bridge of his aging command ship and looked at the human admiral with tired, skeptical eyes. "You brought warships," Sarvak said. "Impressive. But the Hollowing cannot be killed with weapons. It is not an enemy you can shoot." Admiral Cole nodded calmly. "The warships are here to protect our people while they work. We have research teams, medical personnel, and terraforming specialists. They are going to find a way to stop the Hollowing. Our job is to keep them alive while they do it." On the surface of Sanctuary Prime, the work began immediately. Nathan Cross led teams into the infected zones, collecting samples and studying the crystalline structures. Dr. Helen Marsh, a xenobotanist from the research vessel Discovery, focused on finding biological weaknesses in the Hollowing organism. Sergeant Maya Lopez deployed her Marines in a protective perimeter around the research sites. The Hollowing could not be fought with guns, but there were other dangers. Desperate refugees sometimes tried to overwhelm evacuation points. Wild animals, driven mad by the infection, attacked anything that moved. And the crystal itself seemed almost aware, sending tendrils toward anything warm and living. On the 3rd day, the Hollowing surged. It happened without warning. A massive wave of crystalline growth erupted from the northern continent and swept toward one of the main research camps. Within hours, kilometers of uninfected land had been consumed. The researchers barely escaped in time, leaving equipment and samples behind. Captain Hayes ordered a defensive line established at the edge of the new infection zone. Marines dug in along a ridge overlooking the advancing crystal. Valori soldiers joined them, bringing their own weapons and their own determination. Corporal Victor Ruiz was a combat medic attached to the Marine detachment. He had seen battle before, on distant colonies and space stations, but he had never seen anything like the Hollowing. The crystal moved slowly but constantly, spreading across the ground like frozen water. It sparkled in the sunlight, beautiful and terrible at the same time. "Hold the line," Sergeant Lopez ordered. "Do not let it reach the evacuation zone." The Marines opened fire with incendiary weapons, trying to burn the crystal before it could spread. The Valori soldiers used sonic emitters that shattered the crystalline structures. For a while, it seemed to be working. The advance slowed. The line held. Then the infected animals came. Creatures that had once been peaceful forest dwellers now charged toward the defenders, their bodies half transformed into crystal. They felt no pain. They showed no fear. They simply ran forward until they were destroyed or until they reached living flesh and spread the infection. Victor Ruiz moved through the chaos, pulling wounded soldiers to safety and treating their injuries. He carried a Valori child who had been caught in the crossfire, running through a hail of debris to reach a medical shuttle. He did not stop. He did not rest. He simply kept moving, kept helping, kept saving every life he could reach. The battle lasted for 18 hours. When it was finally over, the crystal had been stopped. But the cost was terrible. 47 humans and 112 Valori had been lost. Sergeant Maya Lopez had been hit by crystalline debris in the final hour. She died holding the hand of a young Valori soldier she had been trying to save. General Sarvak Noor watched the humans carry their dead to the evacuation shuttles. He saw the way they treated each fallen soldier with honor and respect. He saw the tears on their faces and the determination in their eyes. "They died for us," he said quietly to Admiral Cole. "They did not know us. They had no reason to fight, and they died for us." Cole's expression was hard. They knew exactly what they were fighting for. They died protecting people who needed protection. That is what soldiers do. On the 6th day, Dr. Helen Marsh made a breakthrough. Working with samples from the battle site, she discovered that the hollowing organism had a weakness. A specific biological compound could dissolve the crystalline structure without harming organic tissue. The compound was rare, but could be synthesized in large quantities using equipment from the human ships. Nathan Cross ran the first tests on infected plant samples. Within minutes, the crystal began to break down. The plants underneath were dead, but the infection was stopped. "It works," Cross announced. "We have a cure." But there was a problem. The compound needed to be deployed across the entire planet simultaneously. Otherwise, the hollowing would simply retreat to uninfected areas and continue spreading. Chief Engineer Rosa Delgado proposed using the terraforming platforms to disperse the compound through the atmosphere, soil, and water all at once. It would take several days to prepare the platforms and position them correctly. Captain Hayes gathered his senior officers and the Valori leadership in the command center. "We need time," he said. "The terraforming platforms will not be ready for another 9 days. During that time, the hollowing will continue to spread. If we do not slow it down, there will be nothing left to save." Ambassador Kira Sol looked at the tactical displays. The infection zones were expanding every hour. Millions of Valori were still in danger. "What do you propose?" she asked. Hayes stood up straight and faced the assembly. "We establish a perimeter around the remaining uninfected zones. Every ship, every soldier, every piece of equipment we have. We hold the line for 9 days. We do not retreat. We do not surrender. We buy our scientists the time they need to finish the cure." General Sarvak Noor stared at him. "You would sacrifice your people for ours?" "We would fight alongside your people for a world that deserves to survive," Hayes replied. "That is not sacrifice, that is honor." The battle for Sanctuary Prime began the next morning. Human and Valori soldiers stood side by side along a defensive line that stretched for hundreds of kilometers. Warships in orbit provided covering fire. Medical teams worked without rest, treating the wounded and evacuating civilians. The hollowing threw everything it had at them: waves of crystal, infected animals, strange formations that moved like living creatures. The defenders held. On day 4, Commander Talia Ford's hospital ship Mercy's Hand became so overcrowded that crew members gave up their bunks to Valori refugees. Ford herself slept on the floor of the cargo bay, making room for a family with young children. On day 7, Corporal Victor Ruiz collapsed from exhaustion after treating wounded soldiers for 36 hours straight. He slept for 4 hours and then went back to work. On day 8, the terraforming platforms moved into position. Rosa Delgado ran final system checks and reported, ready. On day 9, Admiral Cole gave the order. "All platforms, deploy the cure, now." The compound spread through the atmosphere, carried by wind and rain. It seeped into the soil and flowed through the rivers. It touched the crystal and began to dissolve it. Across Sanctuary Prime, the hollowing started to die. The crystal structures cracked and crumbled. The infected zones stopped expanding. For the first time in 7 years, the infection was retreating. On the defensive line, exhausted soldiers watched in disbelief as the crystal in front of them began to fall apart. Some of them cheered. Some of them cried. Some simply sat down and stared, too tired to react. Captain Hayes stood beside Ambassador Kira Saul on a hilltop, overlooking the battlefield. Below them, human and Valori soldiers were embracing each other. The war was over. "You did it," Kira said softly. "You saved us." Hayes shook his head. "And we lost a lot of good people getting here." He looked down at the fallen, both human and Valori, who would never see this moment. But it was worth it. Every single one of them would say it was worth it. 6 months had passed since the hollowing was defeated. Sanctuary Prime was scarred but alive. 40% of the planet remained covered in the remnants of the crystalline infection. The dead zones would take decades to reclaim, perhaps centuries. But the spread had stopped completely. Clean air filled the atmosphere. Clean water flowed in the rivers. And for the first time in years, Valori children were being born into a world that had a future. The capital city had been transformed. Human engineers had helped rebuild damaged infrastructure. Medical teams had established permanent clinics. Schools had reopened, filled with young Valori eager to learn about the strange aliens who had come to save them. In the center of the city, a new monument stood. It was a tower of white stone, simple and elegant, reaching toward the sky. Carved into its surface were names. Every human who had died defending Sanctuary Prime was listed there, alongside every Valori who had fallen fighting beside them. Sergeant Maya Lopez's name was near the top. She had died on the 7th day of the battle, shielding a young Valori soldier from crystalline debris. The soldier, a girl named Tira Vel, visited the monument every day. She would stand in front of Maya's name and whisper words of gratitude that no one else could hear. High Counselor Varric Nall had called a formal assembly to mark the 6-month anniversary. Representatives from every Valori settlement had gathered in the Great Council chamber. Human officers stood among them, wearing dress uniforms and solemn expressions. Varric walked slowly to the center of the chamber. He was older now, more tired than he had ever been. But there was something new in his eyes, something that had not been there 6 months ago. Hope. 312 years ago, he began, our ancestors made a choice. They found a dying world and chose to save it. They asked for nothing. They expected nothing. They simply believed that helping others was the right thing to do. He paused and looked at the human delegation. We never imagined that the species we saved would find us. We never imagined that they would cross the stars to repay a debt they did not owe. And we never imagined that they would bleed and die for strangers, for people they had never met. Varric's voice cracked slightly, but he continued. The humans came when we called. They gave us their ships, their soldiers, their scientists, their hearts. They held the line when the hollowing threatened to consume everything. They fought beside us. They died beside us. And they never asked for anything in return. He turned to face Captain Daniel Hayes, who stood at the front of the human delegation. Captain Hayes, how do we thank you? How do we repay what you have done? Hayes stepped forward. He was not a man who enjoyed formal speeches. He preferred action to words. But he understood the importance of this moment. You do not need to thank us, he said simply, and you do not need to repay us. What you did for our ancestors 300 years ago gave humanity a chance to exist. Every child born on Earth since then is alive because of your kindness. Every song we have sung, every story we have told, every dream we have dreamed, exists because the Valori chose to help when they did not have to. He looked around the chamber at the faces watching him. We have a saying on Earth: pay it forward. Someone helps you, and you help someone else. The kindness spreads, the gift keeps giving. Now we have saved you. And someday, maybe the Valori will save someone else. That is how civilizations become families. That is how strangers become friends. Ambassador Kira Sol rose from her seat. She had spent the last 6 months working on something, a proposal that she hoped would honor what the humans had done. I propose a formal alliance, she said. Not of politics or trade, not of convenience or necessity, but of kinship. The humans and the Valori will stand together from this day forward. When one falls, the other will catch them. When one calls, the other will answer. We will face whatever the galaxy holds as partners, as brothers and sisters, as family. The council voted unanimously in favor. Every Valori representative raised their hand. There was no debate, no discussion. The decision was obvious. Admiral Patricia Cole signed the treaty on behalf of the United Earth Coalition. The document was titled simply, The Covenant of Remembered Kindness. After the ceremony, the human fleet began preparations to depart. Most of the ships would return to Earth. Some would stay behind to continue helping with reconstruction. Engineers and doctors and teachers who had volunteered to spend years on Sanctuary Prime, building a bridge between two species. Dr. Nathan Cross found elder historian Torvund in the archives, studying the old records of the Earth mission. The old Valori looked up as Cross approached. I wanted to give you something, Cross said. He held out a small data crystal. This contains every record of the asteroid impact and the years that followed. The death tolls, the frozen cities, the people who gave up hope, and the moment when the skies began to clear and humanity realized they had been saved. Torvund took the crystal carefully. Why do you want us to see this? Because we want you to understand what you actually saved. Cross's voice was quiet, but intense. 8 billion people today trace their existence to that moment. Every piece of art we have created, every scientific discovery, every act of love and kindness exists because your ancestors chose to help strangers 300 years ago. He put his hand on Torvund's shoulder. This is not repayment. This is thank you. This is us showing you that your gift was not wasted, that the species you saved went on to become something worth saving. Torvund held the crystal against his chest. Tears ran down his face, but he did not wipe them away. We did not know, he whispered. We never knew what happened after we left. We never knew if it worked. It worked, Cross said gently. It worked better than you could have imagined. On the observation deck of the starward horizon, Captain Hayes stood watching Sanctuary Prime rotate slowly beneath him. The planet was beautiful in its own way, scarred but healing, wounded but alive. It reminded him of Earth after the rebuilding, when humanity had crawled out of the ashes and started again. Ambassador Kira Sol joined him at the window. Will you come back? She asked. Hayes smiled. Try to stop us. This is not goodbye, Kira. This is the beginning. Our species are connected now. Whatever happens in the future, we face it together. Kira nodded slowly. She had been afraid for so long, afraid of the hollowing, afraid of extinction, afraid of being alone in a hostile galaxy. But she was not afraid anymore. What will you tell your people when you return to Earth? She asked. Hayes thought about it for a moment. I will tell them the truth, that, 300 years ago, strangers saved us, and that we found them and saved them in return. I will tell them that the universe is not as cold and empty as we thought, that kindness matters, that compassion echoes across centuries, that the things we do for others come back to us in ways we cannot imagine. He turned away from the window and headed toward the bridge. Prepare for departure, he ordered. Set course for Earth. The starward horizon powered up its engines. One by one, the human ships fell into formation behind it. They turned toward the distant stars and prepared to make the long journey home. Kira watched from the observation deck of a Valori shuttle. The human fleet grew smaller and smaller until it was just a cluster of lights against the darkness. Then there was a flash, and they were gone. But they would be back. She knew that now. The humans would always come back, because that was who they were. On the surface of Sanctuary Prime, young Tiravel stood in front of the memorial tower. She looked up at the name of Sergeant Maya Lopez, the human soldier who had died protecting her. "Thank you," she whispered. "I will not forget. I will never forget." She placed her hand against the stone, feeling the carved letters beneath her fingers. Somewhere out there, the humans were traveling home. Somewhere out there, Earth was waiting for them. And somewhere out there, the kindness that had begun 300 years ago was still spreading, still growing, still changing the galaxy one act of compassion at a time. The Valori had saved humanity. Humanity had saved the Valori. And together, they would save each other again and again, for as long as the stars continued to shine.